Kinsey Schofield here. Welcome to Crown and Conflict, a series dedicated to dissecting the most riveting royal scandals in history with insight from world-renowned royal experts. We explore the stories that shook the monarchy and captivated the globe. This week, royal biographer Hugo Vickers joins me to explore the similarities or differences between Meghan Markle and Wallis Simpson. I mean, two women that absolutely captivated the globe. Hugo, you are a level expert when it comes to talking specifically about Wallis. Can you, before we get, I'm going to go rogue in a second and ask you about Prince Harry because I'm honestly curious as a friend to hear what your opinion is here. But can I get a little bit about your backstory when it comes to Wallis Simpson? You slept in the same house that she slept in at one point. I mean, you have an incredible history when it comes to Wallis.
Well, I was very lucky because when I was very young, I was sent over to the house in Paris to get a simple biographical bit of information, really, about the Duke and Duchess. Actually went there in May 1972, the day before the Queen visited him. And so the house was in a fever of activity, and people were ringing up the whole time, and it was all very dramatic. And of course, he died 10 days later. I was on duty for his funeral, lying in state. And suddenly the gentleman usher said, "We have a huge problem. The Duchess's secretary is coming over and none of us know what she looks like." And a little bit like a figure in Oliver Twist, I said, "Oh gosh, I met her last week." What? You know, then they said, "Well, you look after her." And she said to me very politely, "If ever you come to Paris again, do come and see us." And of course, I took that as a golden opportunity, made friends with both the private secretaries, and got rather involved in the whole saga of what happened to her after the Duke died, which led to a book that I wrote, which is called At the Moment Behind Closed Doors, and has inspired the new film, which is coming out shortly, called The Bitter End, with Joan Collins and Isabella Rossellini, which will be an amazing film, which we must all look out for.
Oh, Joan Collins. I mean, the woman is aging backwards. You've spent time with her too recently due to this book becoming a movie, right?
Yeah, I'm not allowed to talk about it, but yes,
Oh, well,
yes.
does she look as good in real life? Well, actually, I did. I met her at the King's coronation. She does. She does look as good in real life as she does on the big movie screen. She's incredibly gorgeous and she's very smart and she's kind.
She's terribly nice. She's much nicer than her dynasty image, which perhaps has made people think that she's that sort of a person. No, she's very, very nice and very, very switched on.
Oh, you know what
And
else? You worked with her years ago on an episode of Larry King Live about Charles the King's
I,
wedding to Queen Camilla.
I did
Yes,
I'm
I think you were in London, satellite. Dickie was in London, satellite. I don't remember where Joan was, but Joan Rivers and Joan Crawford were on this episode defending King Charles and Queen Camilla about their wedding.
Joan Collins, Joan Rivers, certainly, yes. And of course, when you were on Larry King Live, you always had to be looking into the screen, even if there was somebody sitting next to you, because he did these little boxes. So I did appear on that with people like Nancy Sinatra, and Joan Rivers was again incredibly. She was incredibly nice. I met her in New York because I happened to be there. Normally, we did it at 2 in the morning, so you needed a brick to hold your head up, because it was always live at 9 o'clock from New York time. But then when I was in New York, I did it at their time. That was much easier.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure that that was a bit of a break. All right, so I warned you that I was going to go rogue, or rogue before we get into Wallis Simpson and some of her history. There's another conflict that continues to dominate headlines, and that's Prince Harry versus the royal family. What do you make of the headline that's circulating pretty aggressively? It's been happening over the last 48 hours that Prince Harry secretly paid tribute to Prince Philip on the 80th anniversary of VJ Day. I think we might have a different definition of the word secretly than the author of this original headline, because if it's that much of a secret, we shouldn't know about it. And so quickly, Hugo.
Well, yes, I mean, he was prevented some years ago from having a wreath laid on his behalf at the cenotaph, which of course he used to do before he shoved off. And the reason for that was you're either in or you're out. You can't be both. And to have somebody plant a wreath sort of surreptitiously, shall we say, rather than secretly, that's very sad. And I must say, I don't think Prince Philip would be terribly impressed by what Prince Harry's been up to recently. He handed over the Captain General position of the Royal Marines to him, which is a very, very distinguished position. And that, of course, has just been thrown away because you can't be Captain General of the Royal Marines, as I've said before, if you're lying barefooted under a tree in California, as he was shortly afterwards.
Smoking a bowl. you know.
Exactly.
What I thought was so, well, first of all, don't forget that the first year he was rejected from lying the wreath, he did that horrific photo opportunity in an American cemetery, and it was so vulgar and embarrassing and contrived, which I think that this is also vulgar, embarrassing, and contrived because we only know about this because someone wanted us to know about this. And it feels intentional because you and I have been some of the biggest cheerleaders in reminding the world that the Queen and Prince Philip's twilight years were disrupted immensely by these two. They could not, I mean, I doubt they had a peaceful sleep in the last few years of their lives with threats of spare hovering over their heads. Prince Philip in the Oprah Winfrey interview, the Netflix series, was constant bickering and he said, she said being leaked in the press from Harry and Meghan in the lead up to the deaths of both Prince Philip and Queen Elizabeth. And this feels like somebody who's just trying to change the narrative.
And of course, you remember that the Oprah Winfrey interview was actually broadcast when Prince Philip was very seriously ill in hospital. I mean, that was absolutely unacceptable.
Yeah, it was. It was. So do you agree that this was a strategic move PR? It's more of a strategic move PR wise and less about a grandson remembering his grandfather. I'm being asked about an olive branch. Is it an olive branch from Prince Harry? And I'm like, well, I need a second to get my barf bag.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. I mean, you either do the one thing or the other, and I mean, it's a kind of slightly creepy, to get somebody to go and put a wreath down when you've been told that you can't have one laid on your behalf, when everybody else is laying them and all that sort of thing. No, it's awful. It's really
Classic,
awful.
classic defiance. Well, let's talk about Wallis Simpson because even here on this channel, I've had several people compare Wallis to Meghan Markle. And you're actually one of the only authors that I've spoken to that really studied her that said, I don't know if that's fair and I don't know if that's true. So much around Wallis is myth that was likely perpetuated to justify the exile, to justify, kind of shoving them away, and trying to pretend like they didn't exist, Wallis and Edward, after the abdication. Can we talk about some of those myths?
Yes, of course. I mean, the only thing that she has in common with Meghan Markle is the fact that she's America. She was American and she'd been
Divorce.
married.
Yeah.
That's it. That's the over and done with. That's it. That's the only comparison. The awful thing is that if you get involved with something like the abdication, people can say anything about you and they will make up anything. It'll sort of be believed. I mean, even the Queen Mother rather encouraged the myth that she was the woman who stole the king. No, she wasn't. My reading of history is that she was fascinated to be the king's friend, and I don't really mind what interpretation you put on the word friend. It was very exciting to be in London, to have the king coming to dinner, to have footmen bringing round flowers and gold plate, and to have all the most distinguished people of the day longing to be at your table in order to get to the king and meet him and talk to him. Very exciting. But the thought of being the wife of the exiled king, the most hated woman in the world. No, that didn't appeal to her at all. And she always thought that, he'd had a number of sort of girlfriends before and they got dumped at a certain point and he moved on to another one. And she, I think, thought, she would be there for a while and then that would all be rather exciting. And then she'd probably go back to nice, boring Mr. Simpson.
She was just patiently waiting to be dumped. So let's talk about her role in the abdication crisis. So I believe that the myth is that Wallis forced King Edward to give up the throne, that she was behind him saying, "It's me, like I refuse to be your side chick," very modern term. But really, you just said it, that the Queen Mother would whisper in people's ears that Yeah, that she ran off with the future of the monarchy. Um, did Edward abdicate purely for love, or were there also political pressures, personality clashes, and government resistance to her as queen?
Well, there was a lot of things going on. I mean, it does remain one of the most fascinating sagas of the 20th century because men on the whole do not give up things for women. And he gave up ruling over two-thirds of the world's population when you think of the empire at that time for this woman who didn't seem to be particularly beautiful or special or unusual. Why did he do it? So my theory is if you read the letters that he wrote to Frida Dudley Ward, who was a long-time mistress, who actually I did meet in the 80s as well as when she was an old lady, um, you'll find plenty of evidence that he wanted to go, that he was fed up with his role, that he found it frustrating, and that he wanted to go out. Now, he loved the idea of America. And I think that subconsciously, and I don't think he would have admitted this, in Mrs. Simpson, he found in a sense an excuse to go. He must have realized that they wouldn't accept a woman with two husbands living as queen at that time. It was absolutely unacceptable. And on the other hand, that's what he did. And she didn't want him to abdicate. She thought he would be a good king. Indeed, when she actually heard the abdication speech, when she by that stage was down in the south of France, she was cowering under a rug. I have this description from Lord Brownlow to Cecil Beaton, cowering under a rug, thinking, this cannot happen, this must not happen, this is the worst situation that could possibly arise. Then, of course, what could she do? If somebody's abdicated for you, you can't just walk away. So obviously she married him. And then my reading of the situation, and I've really been studying this for decades now, is that she didn't want to marry him, but she made the best of it, and she looked after him very well. She fed him delicious food in beautiful surroundings, and did her best to keep him entertained. A man who had been totally busy all his life suddenly had nothing to do, nothing. Absolutely nothing to do. So there were many hours that need to be filled.
But Hugo, you do realize how much that sounds like Prince Harry using the woman as an excuse to leave, as an excuse to flee,
Well,
and then having a very packed schedule and all of a sudden having nothing to do but twiddle his thumbs.
Well, yes, fair enough. That I agree with, but I
Yes.
think that Meghan Markle never intended to stay.
Right, right. Yes.
I think she wanted global recognition. She wanted status. I mean, we would not be talking about her unless she had married Prince Harry. Now, the Duchess of Windsor was completely different. She remained pretty quiet after that. I mean, okay, she wrote a book. It's actually a very civilized book. They did one or two very gentle interviews, but by and large, you really didn't hear from her again. Certainly not in the same way that Meghan Markle. I mean, I know that the media is different these days, but there was certainly no sort of promoting of herself. She was very much in the background. She created a beautiful house for him in Paris. She decorated it beautifully. She had lovely flowers. She had interesting people. She was a very good maîtresse de maison. She arranged the food was always absolutely delicious. I mean, everything about it was done at a very, very high level of sophistication. Now, one mistake perhaps that the Duchess of Windsor made was that she turned herself into the epitome of a royal duchess, much more elegant than our extremely elegant royal duchesses that we had over here in the United Kingdom. The Duchess of Kent and the Duchess of Gloucester, and they were very elegant ladies. But the Duchess of Windsor was yet more elegant than they were. And she created like a mini court in exile for him. I mean, if you went to the house in Paris, it was full of coronets, it was full of reminders of who he was. There were portraits of Queen Mary all over the place. And that, by the way, was also interesting. A lot of pictures of the Duke's mother, who had never ever received her. That's very dignified. She might have said, I don't want this picture of this woman in the house. No, she appreciated he would miss his mother. So there were lots of pictures of her, lots of pictures of Queen Mary. And it was like, the footmen they were always in livery, and when it was a special occasion, they put on their red uniforms. So many expatriates do that. They want to go away, and having gone away, they create in miniature the world that they'd left. And that's exactly what happened.
But
I'm
how
talking
did
to
public perception wise, how does she make her? Because it sounds like you're saying her mistake, public perception wise, was being the most elegant duchess. Is it haute couture? Is it how she's dressing? Is it how does the
Well,
public get a sense that she is this dignified, graceful, almost more duchess than a real Dutch or the common duchesses at the time?
Well, I know what you mean. The interesting thing is, I mean, there's two things. It's like what she's doing for him, and actually what Lady Diana Cooper, a great friend of both of them, said was, if I'd taken him on, I would have made him to be a cowboy in Wyoming. In other words, let him be free and let him just roam the world. And whereas she created this miniature court. But,
Mm.
on another interesting thing, Kinsey, because she did become in a different way, one of the world's best dressed women. I mean, she had beautiful jewels, and she was. I mean, whole books have been written about her style, her fashion. I mean, she was extremely elegant, and I mean, the jewels were quite fascinating. I mean, because I used to go to the house a lot later on, and I got to know the secretaries. The Swiss secretary told me that when she went to New York, even after the Duke died, they would get all the jewels out of the bank in Paris, and they would be spread all over the bed. This treasure trove, Aladdin's cave of jewels, and the Duchess would, her maid would bring in a pale blue dress and a green dress and things, and the Duchess would decide which she took. They would then insure those particular jewels for the journey and for the stay in New York, and the rest of the jewels would go back to the bank. Well, people don't live like that now, but that was amazing, and that's the sort of thing she did.
Wow, that sounds like a good day to me. All the jewelry on the bed and picking out how glamorous I'm expecting to look. Here are some more serious rumors and myths that you have told me specifically you believe are untrue. Wallis was a German agent who leaked state
Yeah.
secrets to the Nazis. Was this propaganda, post-war rumor mongering, or was there evidence she and Edward had dangerous sympathies?
Once again, I go back to this thing that once you've been involved in the abdication, people can say anything about you. I mean, they said the most terrible things about her. They even said she was a man. They even said, that she'd had an affair with a sort of second-hand car dealer, a man called Trundle. All sorts of things were produced. There's always been a myth about the Chinese dossier, which has all sorts of facts about her. Now, what actually happened, which is what rather played into people's hands, was the fact that the Duke got a message from a man called Oscar Selbert saying, look, you went through the First World War, with the Great War, they would have called it. You don't want another war coming. Why don't you go to Germany, go and look at housing and things. And when they went to Germany, he thought, I can be useful. He had no right to do it. Of course, he shouldn't have done it. He shouldn't have gone. But also, in a way, he could take the Duchess with him, and she was then suddenly see him as a kind of like an influential figure again. Now, when they got to Germany, they suddenly got a message saying that Hitler wanted to see them. And I don't know about you, but if I'd gone to Germany, I was told Hitler wanted to see me, I'd be fascinated to meet him and have a look at him. So that's all they did. They went to see him. And he didn't spend much time with the Duchess. He spent a certain amount of time with the Duke. Inevitably, of course, there were photographs of the Duke waving like this, which like he's giving a Nazi salute. No, nothing more than that. He was just trying to do a certain amount of good. And then, of course, when he was then meant to be doing other things for this Selbert Wenner-Gren organization, but when he realized what they were up to, that they were using him as a pawn, he backed away.
Mm.
The myth certainly lasts. And the awful thing is that the further we get away from their real lives and the serious biographies written by people like Philip Ziegler with full access to all the papers, the worse the rumors come. And yes, you probably will agree with me. These days, people don't really care if it's true or not. As long as it's scandalous, as long as it's outrageous, they will buy the book. They love it.
Well, I mean, to your point, one of the biggest myths and rumors you mentioned a second ago is this dossier about. I
Yes.
mean, how did this come to fruition? How did this come to fruition? All these people saying she went overseas and learned a few tricks of the trade, I guess. And was that just ugly talk so they could be like, well, we know why the king ran away with her.
I mean, everybody has looked for this Chinese dossier thing, and nobody has ever found it. It just simply doesn't exist. And a man called Patrick French, I think, wrote a very good book recently about the sort of world she would have lived in China, and finally made some sense of it. No, of course not. I mean, it goes back. Sorry to keep repeating myself, but like once you're involved in the abdication, anything that possibly
Anything
can,
goes.
anything goes. I mean, it's what happens. It's terrible.
I mean, they did such a good job back then of hiding this relationship from the British public while it was, I think, pre social media. They did such a good job of hiding this relationship from the British media while American media was screaming it from the rooftops. We'll never see that kind of protection when it comes to the British royal family ever again, will we?
No, I mean the newspaper editors all kind of got together and agreed that they would not report it. And I believe in those days, copies of American newspapers would arrive with the article cut out. I mean, who actually did all that? I don't know. But there was this incredible censorship, and of course, people in society knew about Mrs. Simpson, but the world knew nothing about her at all, really, right up until December 1936. And then, of course, inevitably, eventually, I mean, there was this silly bishop who made a sermon and sort of said that he was really more worried about whether the king went to church or not, and this became the excuse for breaking the embargo. And then, of course, it all moved very, very quickly. And what's so fascinating is that, actually, in my opinion, the king abdicated pretty honorably. He didn't make a big fuss. He didn't fight his corner. He just went. He'd gone before people almost realized what was happening. By the time they realized that there was a possibility that he was going to abdicate, he had decided to do so, despite all the protestations of people like Winston Churchill and indeed Mrs. Simpson herself, who said she didn't want him to abdicate. And then, of course, then off he went. But I will say this, once he'd gone, he had a lot of time on his hands and he sort of wanted to come back again and reinvent himself as a younger brother of George VI, go back to living at Fort Belvedere with his wife, take part on his own terms, of course, in royal life. And that was not acceptable. He had really let the side down by abdicating. And you can't have two kings. It just doesn't work.
And
And
you
that
can't
actually,
be half in, half out. I mean, that's been the theme for the last
yes.
5 years. You
And I
can't
mean,
come back when you want to.
exactly. I mean, that's the thing with Prince Harry. I mean, various people, I mean, we may have even talked about this a bit, if Prince Harry himself, let's say even alone, came back to help do royal duties, it really wouldn't work because everybody would be looking at him and wondering what he was doing, whether he was happy in his new role, whether he was behaving properly. It would be a deflection from the king. And so when Edward VIII went, the first thing that George VI's advisors did was to make sure that he was seen as much as possible in different cities in England, because the more he was seen, the more the other one was forgotten and went into the background. And then, of course, there came a time, especially when war came, and it was a nuisance having the Duke of Windsor floating around in Europe because he might get kidnapped. Churchill said to him, "You must come home." But he had these two stipulations. One was that there should be a meeting with the King and Queen, with the Duchess of Windsor, and it should be recorded in the court circular. And the other one was he wanted the title of Royal Highness for her. And so basically they all just said, well, quite, we're not going to do that. So they had to stay away. He could have come back to England if he'd wanted to, but no. So then when Churchill told him in the war, you've got to come home, and he said, not coming home unless blah, 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 blah. Then Churchill wrote to him and said, "Sir, by your own volition, you're a serving Major General in the British Army," which was the role he'd taken. "May I remind you of the dangers of disobeying military orders?" And he
Mm.
left the Duke to stew overnight. And I've seen the notes the Duke made, whinging and whining and wondering, how he could wriggle around that. Guess what happened the next day? Churchill wrote to him, "Sir, I have it in my power to offer you the governorship of the Bahama Islands." In other words, you corner your man and then you fling him across the Atlantic into the Bahamas, where, by the way, he did a pretty good job with the woman he loved at his side.
So that's one of the myths, the exile narrative, that they were exiled victims, shunned unfairly by the royals, and or was it Edward's stubbornness and Wallis's reputation, or and political missteps that
Well,
made
yeah.
reconciliation impossible? Like that's what you're saying. It was kind of all of the above.
Yes, I mean, they wanted him out of the way because they didn't want him to be kidnapped. And, he hadn't been trained as a governor, but I've seen some of the reports that he sent back. They were very good. And eventually, of course, there were problems in the Bahamas because there was the Harry Oakes murder. Well, he wasn't trained to deal with murders, and there's a whole, I mean, there are many, many books on the subject of that. And there were, of course, as you can imagine, there were some pretty slippery characters who'd gone to the Bahamas to escape the war, who are lurking around, and sharks in dangerous waters, really. So the poor Duke was at times, I think, a little bit out of his depth, but by and large, he actually did do a good job. Even Philip Ziegler, who has got very little good to say about him, said that point, that people like Tommy Lascelles and Alec Harding would have been very surprised at how conscientious he was when he got his own way and he had his wife with him. And she even Queen Victoria's granddaughter, Princess Alice, Countess of Athlone, said that the Duchess of Windsor did up the governor's house incredibly. Look, it was beautifully done. Beautifully decorated. I mean, the style and so forth. So there she was. But they never gave them another job after that, and he would have liked it. And the one conversation I would have loved to have overheard would have been when Tommy Lascelles, King's George VI's private secretary, came over to Marlborough House. He was staying with Queen Mary. The Duchess wasn't there, and to say to him, sir, I understand you're enjoying a wonderfully happy married life with your wife, and no one is happier than I am to hear this. And I do know that you gave up an enormous amount in order to make this possible. But could I just point out that your brother, who, unlike you, sir, was not trained for the job, has been landed with the most difficult job in the world, thanks to this, so that you could enjoy this marital happiness. Would you do him just one more good turn and go away? And basically, the Duke did go away. He settled outside in Paris. He bought the mill. He loved his garden. They lived in Paris, and then they used to go to America, and they traveled quite a lot. And they led basically, an elegant but rather pointless existence.
Oh, that's a pretty great description. When there are the debates about the royal family's hatred towards Wallis and Edward, I've seen classism, Edward's own strained family dynamics, or is it simply twice divorced American woman? Not what I mean, you think about Princess Diana, there were headlines about her virginity at the time. I mean, there are such high expectations, or were, I should say. I think Catherine was probably the last time the expectations were held pretty high, but there are such high expectations when it comes to marrying a monarch.
Yes, I mean, I think when you think what happened with Princess Margaret a little bit later, and she, slightly mindful of all the business with the abdication, decided not to marry Group Captain Peter Townsend. You've got a situation where an unmarried princess was being discouraged from marrying a divorced equerry. But a few years later, a divorced princess, Princess Anne, marries an unmarried equerry with no problems at all. And now we have a king who was divorced and a queen who was divorced, and nobody minds at all. So things have changed a lot. So, I think the Windsors probably might have thought, well, hang on a minute, we were rather badly treated. I mean, Philip Ziegler, keep mentioning him because he was the Duke's official biographer. I'm having a conversation with him once, and he actually said that he wondered whether if the king had just held his ground and, been king, been crowned and waited 2 or 3 years, he might have got away with marrying her. I'm not sure that he would.
The Tudor chaos. I mean,
Well, yes.
when I think of kings, typically in history, I think of the thousands of men that died for them because they want more territory, or they want more land, or they want more power. And Edward's the opposite of that. Edward's kind of like, you know what, I'm going to roll over and die.
Well, of course, the other thing was that there's a terrible correspondence between him and Queen Mary because, obviously she felt that he'd really let the side down. She adored him, but he was her favorite. Pretty much, well, I don't know about favorite son, but she was very fond of him. He was the eldest son. And at one point he said, could you please explain your position? And she wrote back and said, when I think of all those young men who gave their lives in the Great War, and you were not prepared to make a lesser sacrifice.
Ooh, ouch.
Of
It
course,
does seem like this royal family has really been controlled by women. I mean, like very opinionated. I mean, and maybe not so much now because I think that Queen Camilla really values King Charles's opinion and respects his opinion. And I've never, honestly, I know that Prince Harry wants us to believe that she's kind of this tyrant behind the scenes scheming. But I've always felt like she that Princess Diana passes away. They're all mortified. You actually see Camilla step back for a long time, respecting the death of Diana. She kind of disappears while supporting the king, prince at the time, behind the scenes, behind closed doors. But they do wait a significant amount of time before they're seen together, before they marry each other. I think she's probably not as vocal and powerful, but it does seem like with this royal family, the women often wear the pants.
Um, I, I think some of the women that they've produced have been extremely good,
Yeah, no, great. I think it's great.
yes, and Lady Diana Cooper used to say it was always people like the Queen Mother who came in from the outside who were so brilliant. And Catherine, of course, again, comes in from the outside. And so that's always been rather a good thing. And yes, and then I do remember what one of the royal weddings, one of the men from the Lord Chamberlain's office saying, "We do our weddings very well, it's our marriages that don't work." Just
Hilarious.
that remark. Um, but, again, the Queen, Queen Elizabeth II, she had a problem because her mother wasn't going to relent really over the Duke of Windsor. But I've seen letters that she wrote to the Duke of Windsor, and they're very friendly and affectionate. And she asks after Wallis by name and love from Lilibet and things like that. And of course, when it came to the thing which particularly exercised him was where he was going to be buried. It was agreed that they would be buried at Frogmore together. And actually, in 1961, the Queen gave permission that flags on public buildings would fly at half-mast on the day of the Duchess of Windsor's funeral, which, by the way, they did without anybody saying anything contrary. Rather interesting.
That's very interesting. Can you tell me about the conversation about the leaves that were falling in the spot and where how Wallis wanted to be buried?
What was very interesting was that it was when Princess Marina was being buried at Frogmore, the Duke of Windsor then thought, yes, he would like very much that they should be in that particular graveyard. And when he was being put into the ground, the Duchess and the Queen were standing side by side, and the Queen said to her, "Which side of him do you want to be buried?" And she thought very quickly, and she loved plane trees, and she used to have the leaves of the plane trees. She used to collect them from her garden and put them on her dressing table. And she thought, well, two things. One, I was always rather in his shadow, and so I'd like to be on the shadowed side of the plane tree. And secondly, she said, no one's ever going to put flowers on my grave, so I would like the leaves from the tree to fall onto my grave. I think that's rather stylish, don't you?
Isn't that so beautiful? I love what you told me that story one of the last times I saw you, and like I could feel my heart breaking inside my body. Well, there is this myth surrounding her, this reputation as a social climber. You talked about how exciting it must have been for her as this young American woman to have the king, the future king sniffing around, wanting to spend time with her, wanting to socialize, even if it was just in a friendly way. This idea of the ambitious gold digger. You say that that's absolutely not true, and I do think that that's one of the reasons why people compare her to Meghan, who I do believe is an ambitious gold digger.
I'm sure she was fascinated to have the king in her life, and also she handled him rather well because she answered back to him, and he rather liked that, when they first met, he made some remark about it's to do with central heating, I think, and she it was rather a boring remark, and she said something like that, expected rather more from the Prince of Wales, and he perked up. And I remember that Lady Diana Cooper, who knew them both, as I say, very well, she said to me once that people really did kind of shape up when she came into the room because she was very funny and she would get you going. And there was one story I always liked, which later on in her life, she said, people are always telling me I ought to look up my old friends. Look 'em up, dig 'em up.
That is
Yeah,
very funny.
she's very good with wise. She has, the wisecracks. They came out of her very quickly. And then James Pennessy was in the car with her once when Mr. Simpson had died in 1958, and she was discussing with him whether or not she should send flowers, and or write a letter or something. He said, he said, I think send flowers. She said, yeah, I think I'll do that. And then James Pippin said, but Duchess, this kind of makes it all right, doesn't it? What do you mean? He said, well, I mean, people always said two husbands living. She said, two husbands living? That's what Queen Mary always used to say, two husbands living. And then she paused and said, do you think we could all become Catholics and get married all over again? She was funny. I think you'd have had a very good time if you went to have dinner with her, and she would have made sure that you were part of the conversation. She was a very dexterous hostess. She didn't let people be left out. She was so yes. I think, of course, socially, yes, she loved all that world. I mean, more than the Duke, really. I mean, and certainly in the later years, she had to really be seen at, going to parties at the Lido. Sometimes I hate to say, he would have preferred probably to stay at home and watch the television or read a book or read Field Marshal Alexander's memoirs or something. He used to sometimes get in the car and say to the chauffeur, "Where are we going tonight?" And they would go off somewhere, but she needed to be out there in the limelight a bit. Yeah, she liked that.
Well, I mean, it was a pretty lonely life though, so I can justify that, feeling dismissed by, well, I'd be feeling so globally rejected. Yes, I'd want to be seen. I'd want to be seen as I'd want to, it would be a way for me to make sure that people knew I wasn't the woman that they were saying I was behind closed, like the whispers weren't true.
Yes, and then the other thing, of course, was that again the Swiss secretary told me a rather interesting story about how whenever we're talking about late 60s, early 70s, before the Duke died, obviously, that when she went to the hairdresser, she'd come down the stairs at the house in the Bois de Boulogne. He'd come down in the lift, and he'd be there to see her into the car and close the door. And then the Swiss secretary said, wasn't it wonderful? When she came back from the hairdresser, there he was on the steps waiting to open the door for her and see her in. Well, I know what she means by that, but if you want a spaniel, don't marry one, buy one. I mean, the thought of him following her around the whole time must have been very claustrophobic, because I think he realized that he'd put her into a very difficult position. He had allowed the world to think of her as the most hated woman and all those sort of things. And, he hadn't sorted out the deal. He hadn't, he could probably have fixed it that she should have been an HRH or something while he was still king. Maybe, I don't know, maybe not. But he didn't really, he went too quickly. He hadn't sort of sorted out all his plans on her behalf. And then he realized that, his family weren't going to come to the wedding. They weren't going to receive her. They didn't really want to know. It must have been very upsetting for both of them.
Yeah, I agree. But the Spaniel story always or also reminds me of Prince Harry, the Instagram boyfriend now that we see following Meghan Markle around taking pictures and video of her for Instagram. I'm like, get a job, Harry, get a real job. Can I ask you about Wallis's portrayal in pop culture? I know that I doubt you liked the movie, but I loved Madonna's We. And then The Crown. When you watch it, do you just recoil because you don't agree so much with the way that she is presented in pop culture?
Well, I hate The Crown because basically it's beautifully filmed, well scripted, well acted, wonderful actors and actresses, wonderful sets, lavishly produced, but fundamentally dishonest because a lot of the things that they put in there didn't happen. I indeed have taken every single episode apart, 60 episodes, and available on Kindle, I think very cheaply, a couple of dollars, called The Crown Dissected. So I don't like the way she's portrayed in that. I did also not like the way Madonna portrayed her. Not even sure I really think that Cynthia Harris in the Edward and Mrs. Simpson with Edward Fox, which was a wonderful production, you don't really come away liking the Duchess very much from that either. So, there's still a lot of turning the world's view about her around. I mean, I do see her ultimately as a sort of victim of this saga. And of course, certainly at the end of Edward and Mrs. Simpson, when the car drives away, you think, oh God, did it have to end like that? Where are they going? What's going to happen next? Into this. And they were locked together, because of this thing that they had done, for 35 years. They had to keep the myth going. And that actually is a very interesting thing that happened to her when the Duke died. Monsieur Martin at the house, who very perceptive man who worked there, was still there when she died, said up until the day the Duke died, she knew everything. and after the Duke died, she knew nothing. By which I mean she'd been so busy kind of perpetuating the myth of the greatest love story of the 20th century. And after he died, she didn't have to do that anymore. She couldn't do it and she wasn't well. And so everything fell apart. But until that moment, when she was in Paris, if somebody dropped a plate in the mill, she kind of knew about it by radar. I mean, she was very, very switched on. And after that, she was very switched off. And it was very sad. She had these 14 years of absolutely terrible, terrible life when her lawyer moved in, locked her up, and eventually she was on a life support machine with tubes in her nose and things, and just being turned to the left, turned to the right, not able to see anybody. It must have been absolute hell.
Oh, and that was so that her attorney could like spend her money and abuse her power of attorney, right? Or will I get in trouble for saying that?
No, 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 you won't get into trouble for saying that at all. It's exactly what happened. I mean, the trouble is actually if you're a very rich widow and you don't get on terribly well with your husband's family and you've got no relations of your own and you've got a sly butler, a dodgy doctor, a dishonest lawyer, and an avaricious Swiss banker, you're in big trouble. And that's what happened. They closed in on her. There's so many stories, Kinsey, about that, which happens to rich old ladies. And she was really the biggest victim of all at that point. And the Duke would have been utterly horrified because he only wanted her to be protected after he died. That was his main concern. And Metro Bloom sort of managed to persuade her to sack the English lawyer, and then she took over. Then she got rid of the American secretary, John Utter, and then she got rid of the Swiss secretary eventually. And at that point, she took complete control and locked her up, basically.
I think that's an entirely different episode of Crown and Conflict. I feel like that we could spend a whole show talking about that.
And we should talk about it maybe when the film comes out, because
Yeah.
that's obviously what the film is always going to be about. It's a
Okay.
very interesting saga.
Can you tell me before we go about the charms? I always loved that he would give her these little charms. I thought that that was so romantic.
But there's a whole, different narrative really about the jewelry and the little messages and all those things. And yes, I mean,
I'm
I guess,
clearly just a girl that never gets any jewelry, Hugo. Let me live. Okay, let me live through Wallis.
well, Butler and Wilson do a very good line in Flamingos, like she had, and there's some very very lovely things that you can get, which look very like her jewels. I mean, she really, I mean, some of the jewels, that particularly the flamingo, she wasn't really associated with that during her lifetime. There are only about, I can think of about 4 or 5 pictures of her wearing it. But after she died, it became the great sort of iconic image. But likewise, too, yes, I mean when they were having the big sale in Geneva, I mean, all the dates were examined. People like me were wondering, what happened on that particular date and what this particular word meant or whatever this message was. I mean, he really did give her, he showered jewelry on her, and as I say, which led to the Aladdin's cave. And when it was sold, it sold for an enormous amount of money. People all over the world were buying it for way beyond its actual value.
I mean, to have a piece of that would be so amazing. I can't imagine being able to look at that what a shiny bed just full of jewels and glossy items. All right, so behind closed doors, the tragic untold story of the Duchess of Windsor. When can we look forward to the reprint coming out? Because you've updated it a little bit.
Well, Pegasus are producing it, and I'm hoping it'll be coming out sometime next year.
Well, that's
They kind of
exciting.
coincide with the film, I think.
This is what
But
we call a deep
subject of the-
tease.
yeah, the subject of the jewels. I mean, I went to Geneva and I was looking at the jewels, and some of the jewels still had her makeup on them. Like jewelry does.
Yes. Oh, I love that. I love that. I'm so jealous. You've seen so many beautiful things, and you've purchased some of her items. I know that you have some of their items in your home.
Yes, I bought some Dimitri Bouchen gouaches, which were in the bathroom because I knew about Dimitri Bouchen. Nobody's ever heard of him, but I'd bought one that Garbo had, and then Boris Cocknell had some, and then I discovered that he decorated her bathroom, and I thought, well, I'll go to New York and I'll buy one. But because people only wanted things with coronets on them or pugs, I got 26, I think,
Oh
and
my
subsequently bought more. And yeah, and I've been lucky. I've got quite a few things tucked away.
When I was at my friend Miss Pat's house in South Carolina, she walked me through her house and showed me what she got from the auction too. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is the Duke and Duchess of Windsor. Just let me touch it. So it's
Yes,
so fun to
yes.
be around those items. Hugo Vickers, something tells me I'm going to talk to you very soon. So I hate to say goodbye. More like see you later. Talk to you very soon, at least over WhatsApp. You've been so fascinating today. Thank you so much for all of your insight. That Wallis book, if you want to peruse used books, you can find the original. But if you're looking forward to the updated version, that's coming out in 2026. Something to look forward to, along with a gorgeous, glossy movie. And Hugo, it's been so fun to pick your brain and find out the truth about Wallis Simpson.
Thank you very much. Always a pleasure.
Agree with us, disagree with us, let us know in the comments below. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share this video with a friend. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Kinsey Schofield.